I'm working in marketing for the past 12 years, building GTM engines, either from scratch, so 0 to 1, or scale to multi-million in ARR. I've built 3 GTM engines for 3 different companies and consulting one of my previous employers. A good part of the revenue was coming only from sales and partners, and marketing was negligible. A bit of a spoiler, when I left 3.5 years later, marketing was responsible for around 45% of the pipeline.
Are we rolling? Sweet. Now my day starts.
I want to zoom in on one of your roles in the past where there wasn't a lot of influence by marketing. When you left, if that company was generating almost half of its pipeline through marketing, and we're talking single to double digit million revenue, is there a certain ceiling or point where you think sales led growth just isn't enough to get you to a specific segment of your market?
Maybe there are some companies where this is possible, but I would say that scaling via marketing gives you the speed that scaling only via sales you cannot achieve. And this is what I've seen. So when I joined one of my previous employers, a good part of the revenue was coming only from sales and partners, and marketing was something negligible. When I left 3.5 years later, marketing was responsible for around 45% of the pipeline. How does this look in reality? One of the successful tactics that we activated was the ABM one. We tiered our accounts, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and we had a list of technographics, firmographics, demographics that we were looking at. Based on that, we made this tiering. This was a common process with the sales team. It was driven by marketing, but I would say this was just contextual for us. This can happen differently in different companies. I wanted to take lead on that, but that's not mandatory. Then we mapped pain points per tier, so not one size fits all messaging. For example, in tier 1, big companies, enterprises, there's procurement process, there are risk concerns, there are different success metrics that are different from mid-market. So you have to take that into consideration. Then we build the signal layer. This is something that we've done without AI because it was 4 or 5 years ago, but now it's even easier with AI workflows. The signal layer was based on hires in those target accounts, especially in security leadership, because this was the category that we were playing in. Leadership changes, founding rounds, website visits, specific content downloads, job postings for roles where we know that our product solves a pain that they have. We were looking at companies that were hiring security analysts. We knew that this was a very strong signal that they have a pain point that we could address with our product, and then try to automate all those signals. The flow was something like this. And this is something I've kind of replicated on one of my recent roles. There's a signal, there is a tool, and that tool could be anything from clay or something that you built from the scratch on your own. That signal enriches the account in the CRM. Then there are some actions that are fired either from that tool, could be Nathan, Zapier, Make, and then sales gets a context-aware alert and a specific reason to reach out. So it's not a cold list. This is the difference with the ABM approach that is based on signals. ABM without signals is just targeted spam. ABM with signals is that you have timing and you have context. And that's the big difference between the two of them. The moment when ABM becomes real is when the sales team is not asking, should I reach out? But they are asking, what do I say? Because they know that the signal is already there. So they know that that's the good moment to reach them.
Was there a specific tool or?
What I use Clay. This is usually for signal enrichment and outreach triggers. I use Nathan or Zapier for connecting signals to different actions, different tech stack tools. I use Claude a lot. The way that I'm using is as a strategic partner. The strategic thinking is still human. Validating hypothesis, drafting the first research synthesis, or some scenario planning. I use AI to do bidding on campaigns and lead scoring. I have an AI workflow that reduced the acquisition cost by 60% in 6 months. That's not a generic tool that the platforms have, but something built custom for one of the projects that I'm in. Another way of using AI is we've built some competitor monitoring agents. There are some agents that are watching competitor product updates, press releases, G2 reviews, edit mentions, and so on. We also have an agent that looks at industry. It monitors niche security forums, practitioner communities, and they are sending this updates in a Slack for the product and the sales teams. We have an agentic engine optimization agent that tracks where the competitors are being cited in ChatGPT and Perplexity for some key queries that are using. The way that I ask my teams to use it is to look at all the redundant tasks that they are doing and try to automate it with AI.
Was there something that didn't work that you expected to work, or the other way around, that worked that you didn't expect?
I have examples for both of them. What I expected to work was that we build a list of signals, 25 signals. I expected that some of them are more relevant than the others, and it's not the case, but that's just something that I wanted to experiment with. I wanted to understand what the importance of each signal. So I had a bet in my mind, and in reality, it was not like this. But that's normal. It's something that I learned across my career in marketing, that usually I made some bets with myself, and the reality did not play out as I expected. In terms of what works is if you manage to use some proven signals from existing discussions that sales was having. So, for example, looking for companies that were hiring security analysts, this was something that we learned from discussions that sales was having with potential customers. This was an easy insight because it was just listening in the sales calls.
I had someone on the show say that they had built internally a tool or an agent that analyzed hundreds of discovery conversations, and then the output was for the team to categorize in order of priority what were the most common or recurring patterns.
That's that thing to have, and it's something that I'm always pushing. A good part of my experience comes from cybersecurity. In cybersecurity, you are not marketing to normal buyers. You are marketing to people that are professionally paranoid. So they are trained to not trust you by default, and having call recordings in cybersecurity, it's a tricky point. It's an ongoing discussion that I had inside the companies that I worked for, because okay, for a marketer, that's a dream, having all that information and all those insights that you can pull out and draw campaigns based on them. But at the same time, trust and privacy. There are two important aspects that you need to have in mind when working with security professionals. That's not so easy. So most of the times I had someone from my team or either myself listening, being actively involved in sales calls, in discovery calls, because that was the easier way to.
I want to unpack listening to sales calls and then using specific customer language.
Yeah.
How exactly did you guys do that?
One of the campaigns that I'm probably the most proud of didn't come from a brainstorming or from a strategy meeting, but it comes from some sales discussions. The product had genuine GDPR compliance, and it was built on European infrastructure, which brings advantages over US providers. 100% European servers. US Patriot Act doesn't apply. The product was very different from a technical perspective, but this was not surfaced a lot in marketing. So this was one of the learnings that we had. We validated this listening to more sales calls and doing some win-loss interviews. Customers that chose us, they were saying, you are solving a compliance headache. And this phrase was something that was missing from our marketing assets. What we did is that we built a systematic process of documenting exact customer language, pain points, and that language fed directly into campaign copy. This also drove us to reposition as the European alternative to the big US players. So we built a keyword strategy around this team that showed real buyer intent, not vanity search volumes. We had this positioning where we answered to a question that our competition had no incentive to own. What's the European alternative to Cloudflare or Akamai? We were targeting this keyword logic of competitor plus alternative, or competitor plus European, competitor plus GDPR compliant, because this signals active evaluation. passively browsing. This whole strategy shift of positioning ourselves as the European alternative brought significant pipeline contribution, and it started from one insight that we got from listening more to our customers. That was one of the best learnings that I had. Sales and marketing should work together.
Take me to the first 90 days. What does that actually look like?
In one of my previous roles, the first 90 days were not a lot of marketing, I have to say, because there was no marketing infrastructure or GTM infrastructure in place. If I look back, basically my first 90 days did not produce any leads, but this was probably the best decision that I made, because every lead that we had after that, we could explain where it came from and why it mattered. So I joined a company where marketing was very branded focus, good looking outputs, but no pipeline input, no pipeline accountability, no CRM, no buying intent signals, no account mapping. The revenue team did not exist. So what I had to do is build some sort of mindset shift before touching a single campaign. I had to shift the team's questions from did we publish this to how did this contribute to pipeline. That was the main challenge, I would say, and this was a cultural challenge, not a tool challenge. So it was not something that I implemented and it just started working, but it was a bigger challenge needed. What my actual first 90 days looked like: Salesforce build out, ICP framework, account mapping with different tiers in whales and strategic accounts and mass market accounts, mapping the buying signals, setting up the trackings, setting up the intent, setting up the lead scoring. The output was a spreadsheet with the data mapping and the Salesforce build. Nobody celebrated, but then every campaign that we ran was measured better than what we had before, and it was a success looking back. It was not a success if we evaluate the first 90 days. And sometimes this is what you have to build in the 90 days. So nothing flashy, nothing that you could put in your portfolio. It's the foundational work that needs to be built. Zero campaigns, zero leads, just deep foundational work. This was actually the first 90 days.
I hear you on the foundation work. I spoke to a RevOps just before you, and their first 90 days was coming in and basically cleaning up all the mess. Was there a specific moment or example that comes to mind when you were talking about this like team mindset shift? How did you actually take the team on that?
I'm not saying that this happened in the first 90 days, but for sure the process started with those 90 days. It was involving teams that were not directly contributing to revenue, and our content teams, product teams, product marketing, design teams, and explaining what we do when we have a working demand gen system, and involving them in the discussions with sales, showing them the dashboards that we've built. It was a process of involving them in the broader GTM engine. When they understood how a content piece works in the broader scheme of things, this is the moment when that shift happened. And also, one thing that probably they still quote me on that is that when prioritizing between different projects or different actions, that we didn't have the resources to do all of them, so we had to pick one. My question was, what's closer to the revenue? So it was the main motto of this transition period. What's closer to the revenue? This was basically, at some point I stopped asking this, because they were already coming with the answer in mind. Here is how this helps us with revenue. So this would be something that I'm quite proud of.
Was there anything in place at all, like an ICP messaging when you joined?
There were some things, but they were outdated. And you know how it is with the sales collateral produced by marketing. If they are not used in actual sales processes, it's just waste. If they are not used, it's not a good signal. This is how we measure the impact of the marketing materials that we produce. If we see them used by the salespeople, and if we get questions about how to add some elements into them, because this is a good proxy of knowing that your product marketing is being actively used in deals, and it's not just something flashy on the website.
Across all of your roles, first 90 days,
Yeah.
what would you say was like the most challenging moment?
Usually this is not on the radar of the leadership. They want something very tangible and something that generates results immediately. But without a proper foundation, that's just wasting money, wasting budgets. You just run campaigns for the sake of running campaigns, not for the revenue or for the return on those campaigns. So managing the expectation that the foundational work is something not negotiable. This was a constant in almost all my roles.
You've mostly spent your time selling to very technical buyers. You mentioned security analysts, stock analysts, CISOs. What makes marketing technical products different? And like, what's the most challenging part about it?
This is what I learned in cybersecurity. You are competing against professional skepticism. This is something that I had in mind in all my years working in cybersecurity. The average CISO from an enterprise is buying or renewing around 80 cybersecurity products per year. If you extrapolate this a bit, this means that he hears around 300 pitches annually. Basically, that's one per day. Overall, cybersecurity is a very crowded category. Probably there are more than 5,000 companies that are active in the cybersecurity space. What's also true is that the budgets on cybersecurity are increasing year over year, but also the CISOs have this pressure to demonstrate ROI on every line item. Another challenge is not necessarily how do we get on the shortlist, but how do we stay present long enough to be considered when the shortlist is formed. And this is a different problem that requires a different playbook, let's say.
Right.
The buying process also shifted. CISOs are not the only decision makers. Now the buying committee includes security analysts, cloud architects, compliance leads, finance most of the time. Messaging only to CISO, you are missing a good part of the buying committee. There's a growing trend of buying platforms, not point solutions. And probably this is true for other industries. CISOs are buying a lot based on peer recommendation, getting cited in analyst reports, getting cited in newsletter from a practitioner in an industry. They have roundtables, they have private Slack channels. Marketing is not so much driven by traditional channels.
What part of that process would you say was the hardest to get right?
When you have to make some decisions where you don't have enough data to base your assumptions on. This is the tricky part, because that's where the strategy could break at some point. For example, when you are tiring your companies, let's say you have a static list of ABM accounts. Do you go by revenue, headcount growth in the past years? You have to make some strategic decisions on what are the metrics that are more important than the others. You need to put some value points on a few metrics, and that's usually where it's a mix of gut feeling plus, I don't know, frameworks plus experience plus maybe some consultants that you can discuss with that have done this in other companies.
If you're not failing experiments, you're probably not experimenting enough. Take me to an example of that. What's an experiment that didn't work?
In one of the companies that I worked, we had this demand gen engine, and one of the elements was having paid social leads, and the results were great. We had something like 1,000 qualified leads per year with perfect job titles. They were engaging with our content from a lead metric standpoint. This was the best performing program on paper. The problem with them is that under 5% of them converted to opportunities or revenue. We had these long sales cycles, easily 3 to 6 months, which meant that the data looked rich when we looked monthly or quarterly, but the actual results were invisible in those short reporting windows. Probably every marketer had at some point. Um, you don't have a strong relationship between traffic or leads and revenue. Everyone celebrates top of the funnel, while the bottom it's failing. What we did is that after some quarters, we decided to drop this. We ungated all the website content. We had fewer leads, but we had more exposure. This required two things that most marketers underestimate. First of all is courage, because we had to throw away a celebrated tactic internally, and also It required political capital, because to convince the leadership to miss the data that we've been presenting for the past 12, 18 months, that was a bold choice. This was a long negotiation. It was not only one strategy meeting. Basically, the system was producing numbers that were looking right, but in the end they were not generating revenue. What happened after we switched the strategy? This drove a better revenue for us. Looking back, probably took us longer than it needed to make this decision.
The end result was ungating content. That's a cool example. I want to ask you, what's your advice for someone who is in a similar position, has the dilemma to make a very bold bet, but is afraid that the throughput of seeing the results of that would mean lost time? What's your advice to someone in that situation?
My example was 2 or 3 years ago. I would say that if you have a way of measuring the real output, so not only the number of leads and the quality of leads, but if you can measure the relevancy to revenue, and you can strongly argue that that's a good decision, that could be a tactic. This feels like marketing from a couple of years ago, and I don't think this still works. I think most of the marketing tactics and marketing playbooks are not relevant in 12 to 18 months.
You've hired multiple marketing teams in the past. If you were starting again tomorrow, what would be the first role you hire?
I would say that my answer changed 3 times in the past 7 years or so. So initially, when I was in this position, I was hiring a marketing or growth generalist, someone that can handle lots of topics without a deep specialization on one channel or one tactic. Then, as I progressed in my career, I switched my answer, and I was hiring a product marketer, because I saw the need of bridging between product and marketing narrative. That was a good, yeah. There were a few teams where I hired this role as the first one, and now I would say that GTM engineer would be so someone that can build the infrastructure. And from what I've seen in practice, this role can make every hire after him or her more effective. Having a GTM engineer that can set up a Clay, Nathan, intent infrastructure, attribution models, CRM flows, that's something that is needed before any other role. I've seen examples of companies that hired a content manager or a content writer, a demand gen, and then the GTM engineer. The result, the content was published, there was no distribution, the campaigns run, but there was no attribution. The insights were lost because nothing is connected. The right order should be infrastructure, message, amplification. I would hire someone that can build the pipes first. Without the pipes, content is just noise.
What is a common mistake or misconception that you feel startups make most often when they make their first marketing hires?
There are multiple errors that I've seen. Either they hire someone too junior, or they hire someone too senior that is kind of disconnected from the hands-on work. They hire a profile that initially was brought to write content, but in the end expanded to all marketing functions, and it's something that cannot work. In the end, it will be just AI slop on every marketing discipline. They hire too late. I've seen companies that hired the first marketing person after the product was built, after everything was ready to be launched. But usually it's a disconnect from the moment.
If someone joined their first startup tomorrow, what would you say is a belief that you think is completely wrong about demand gen?
If you join as the first marketeer and you are a demand gen and you start with campaigns, I think it's zero chance to succeed. The sequence is wrong. You shouldn't be the first hire at a startup as a demand gen, unless you can do some work that is a bit outside the scope of this role, like some product marketing, some GTM engineering, some content writing.
And that's in the trenches.